This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated online cinema streaming exceptional films from around the globe. Get 1 month free at mubi.com/CinemaTyler. Perhaps the most famous sequence in Alfred Hitchcock's North by Northwest isn't the climactic chase across Mount Rushmore that inspired the story, but instead, a completely gratuitous event, the crop duster attack. According to screenwriter Ernest Lehman, Hitchcock told him, "I've always wanted to do a scene in the middle of nowhere, where there's absolutely nothing. You're out in the open and there's nothing all around you. The camera can turn around 360 degrees and there's nothing there but this one man standing all alone, because the villains who are out to kill him have lured him out to this lonely spot." So what went into making such an iconic scene? We'll find out in today's episode of Making Film. Hitchcock had said that he wanted to subvert the cliche of a man lured to a dark intersection of the city with rain-slicked streets and a black cat strolling by. His idea was the exact opposite, a bright day in the middle of nowhere. There's no one hiding in a darkened alley because there is no alley. There's no place for a villain to hide. There's nothing for miles. As ridiculous as it sounds, Hitchcock's original idea was that suddenly a tornado comes along. It's an interesting idea, but it doesn't make sense for this kind of movie. Lehman asked Hitchcock how the villains could create a tornado, and Hitchcock didn't know. Lehman suggested that maybe a plane could come along, and Hitchcock loved it, adding that it should be a crop duster and that they should plant crops nearby. By the way, the cost of planting the cornfield and securing the location was $5,200, which today would be a little over $44,000. In the first draft of the script, it was a wheat field instead of a cornfield. Lehman and Hitchcock had written to the research department asking, quote, "What crops grow within 2 hours automobile drive of Chicago that a man can run into and be hidden from a diving plane? Wheat? Corn? Others? Are any of these crops normally dusted in the fall or at any other time of the year?" Apparently, there is few surviving documents of the planning of the crop duster scene because it provided very few problems during the production, especially when compared to the difficulty in shooting the Mount Rushmore sequence, which needed, quote, 26 matte shots and required 2 conferences with Burks and Boyle. The sequence is about 10 minutes long with very little dialogue.
Hot day.
Seen worse.
Hitchcock and Lehman acted out the entire sequence in Hitchcock's living room, and then Lehman incorporated everything they did into the script. This is why the sequence appears in the script pretty much like it does in the finished film.
He'd have a finished script. He would then take a pad with 3 rectangles on it. He would then draw every single shot in the picture. He would then go over it with the cameraman. So by the time he got on the set, he knew exactly what that movie was going to look like up on the screen.
Hitchcock often said that production is a bore because by the time they get to that stage, he's already made the entire movie on paper. The storyboards for the film were illustrated by Mintor Hubner, who had also done the storyboards for Hitchcock's Strangers on a Train. The entire film was planned out shot by Hitchcock, Lehman, and Hubner. The script contained most of the angles and shot sizes already, but the storyboards are pretty much exactly what we see in the film. As described in the book Hitchcock's Notebooks, quote, "It is Hitchcock's sequence, but it is his sequence as realized by Lehman and Hubner." Here we can see Hitchcock's rough sketch of the most iconic shot of Thornhill running from the plane. And here's Hubner's storyboard. Now, I'm not sure if this is entirely true. Another source claims that there were no storyboards made to plan this scene, and these storyboards were actually done after the fact for publicity purposes. The source is the book Hitchcock at Work by Bill Krohn, and he writes that they instead used a diagram and a shot list to plan the scene. This is the diagram showing the plan for the crop duster scene. Everywhere you see a T in a circle, that's supposed to represent Thornhill and his movements. We can also see the shot list here. I'll link to these in the description so you can check them out. Because of the speed of production, this diagram and shot list were used instead of storyboards. Krohn also writes that the scene was designed by Hitchcock, the cameraman Robert Burks, and the production designer Robert Boyle. The source for this is a memo from October 6, 1958, containing notes and mostly a list of shots of the airplane. I'm not sure where the storyboards factor in, but it appears to me that at least Hitchcock and Lehman wrote out the scene with the camera angles, and then Hitchcock took that to the cameraman and production designer to turn it into a more concrete plan and shot list. We can see that the opening establishing shot is pretty dang close to its storyboard counterpart. Hitchcock was originally going to begin the sequence with a dolly shot of the bus pulling up, and then would crane up to show the extent of the location. He threw this out in favor of starting the sequence with a dissolve from Eve's face to the place she is sending Thornhill. This was shot in California, not in Indiana like the film portrays. To get this shot, they used a crane, but there was a town visible in the background, so they had to mat it out. With the scope of the narrative space established, our intellect kicks in.
The first essential to get the ordinary mixed up with the extraordinary is that you have prairie-like land around you and a man in a business suit.
Yes.
You see, there's your immediate counterpoint.
The point is to confuse the audience members who want to figure out where the threat is coming from, but don't know from where. We are put into Thornhill's shoes with the various point of view shots, but what's important is that we see the crop duster pretty much straight away. And since it appears normal for the setting and nothing is happening, we file it away as a harmless part of the narrative space. And before we have time to consider the plane, a car comes speeding down the road. Surely something will happen with this car. After all, it's approaching very fast and loud, but alas, it's nothing. The same thing happens with the more menacing looking car. It seems like nothing is happening, but really there's a variety of possible threats that present themselves before turning out to be nothing. This man reminds us of the crop duster in the middle of some mundane chit-chat.
Some of them crop duster pilots get rich. They live long enough.
Now the next question was, if it's so ordinary as this, now you begin to gradually drift into the extraordinary because you bring up the question, naturally, there's a plane dusting crops where there are no crops. So immediately your audience are beginning to sit up.
He brings it to our attention in just a way that tells us that something isn't right, but leaves before we have time to consider what seems off. The bus pulling up and the man leaving interrupts our thought process. As Hitchcock said, now Cary Grant can't talk with the man about this mysterious plane. By the time we are back thinking about the plane, it has already begun making its move. Filmmaker Francois Truffaut noted that Hitchcock is going against the traditional editing style here. Instead of increasing the tempo of the shots during the action, Hitchcock uses pretty much equal shot duration for everything at this point in the scene. Hitchcock said, "Here, you're not dealing with time, but with space. The length of the shots was to indicate the various distances that a man had to run for cover, and more than that, to show that there was no cover to run to. This kind of scene can't be wholly subjective because it would go by in a flash." Hitchcock describes subjectivity in both the shots of our view of the subject of the scene and the shots of what they see, so a shot reverse shot would be a subjective sequence. It's necessary to show the approaching plane even before Cary Grant spots it, because if the shot is too fast, the plane is in and out of frame too quickly for the viewer to realize what's happening. Using only subjective shots, the scene might look like this. But this takes all of the suspense out of it and turns it into just an action scene. The audience doesn't have time to anticipate what will happen. They're just reacting to a series of events in rapid succession. Hitchcock said that he used the same technique when directing the birds. A subjective view would have the birds attack the people out of nowhere because the characters aren't expecting it. However, the anticipation of seeing the birds dive adds to the suspense, and without the shots of the birds diving, the audience might not even be sure that what they saw was a bird at all. So the crop duster sequence is made up of a series of subjective shots, like Cary Grant's point of view and reaction shots, and a few objective shots, like shots of what the plane is doing that Cary Grant doesn't see. This allows us to understand what is happening intellectually with the objective shots, and empathize emotionally with the subjective shots at the same time. We can see here that they used rear projection to get the shot of Cary Grant diving for cover as the plane flies overhead. The shot of the plane that was projected on the screen was filmed in 70mm, while the rest of the film was shot in 35mm. They did this to make sure that the image quality was maintained while photographing the screen on 35mm. Here is a photo of them shooting the plane diving toward the camera for the shot. The second unit got this shot, quote, during a 3-day period, between October 6th to 8th in 1958, on the 30th and 32nd days of production. However, most of these shots of Grant and the plane were done for real. Here we can get a sense of the camera setup. There were supposed to be 3 shots from a helicopter showing the crop duster's point of view, but they were thrown out before production. Now, Hitchcock has a principle of, quote, utilizing materials to the fullest dramatic extent. In an interview with the American Film Institute, he discusses an example of this.
In the picture North by Northwest, Cary Grant is trapped in an auction room. He can't get out, except by one way, and that's bidding. Crazy bidding, you see. So he gets himself thrown out. But the essential point is, he is in an auction room. And you must use the auction room.
In this way, the auction room isn't just an arbitrary setting. There is purpose to everything. At one point, he wanted Cary Grant to hide inside Lincoln's nose and then have a sneezing fit. But how does this factor into the crop duster scene?
One rule I have, one very essential, if you have a crop duster, you must let it dust. Therefore, he runs into the corn and hides in the corn. What does the airplane do? It dusts the crops. It does its job on a man and not on the crops.
They actually had to shoot part of the sequence after Grant flees the cornfield a second time, because the script supervisor forgot to make sure that Grant was covered in crop dust for continuity. It seems like they shot the part of Grant in the crops on a soundstage separate from the shooting location, so it isn't that crazy to think that no one would have noticed. Here we can see a continuity photograph for Grant's dusty look. Thornhill sees a tanker truck approaching and runs out to flag it down. The pilot, expecting the tanker truck to speed by Thornhill, crashes into the side of the tank, exploding on impact. Let's be honest, this model could have been better, but hey, it's quick. I like the little Thornhill laying under the front of the truck. Apparently, it wasn't uncommon for crop dusters to crash because the dust canisters had an effect on the balance of the planes. There was a time when we might have actually seen who exactly was attempting to bump off Thornhill. The person shooting at Cary Grant was Leashed, who we would have seen in the burning remains of the plane. And you'll notice that Leashed doesn't appear in the film again after that scene. After seeing a rough cut of the sequence, Lehman wrote a memo to Hitchcock suggesting the sound effects be louder. Hitchcock ignored the memo and opted to let the images speak for themselves, which likely lends insight into why he decided not to use music in the sequence until the end. Many films and television shows have referenced or paid homage to the crop duster scene.
This is what a cornfield looks like, honey.
The one that sticks out to me the most doesn't feature anyone chased by a plane. I'm talking about the scene in Seven where John Doe gets Mills and Somerset to go out to the middle of nowhere for the last part of John Doe's plan. This was no doubt inspired by the crop duster sequence in North by Northwest. I don't know, there's just something menacing about open spaces sometimes. Thanks for watching, and thanks to Mubi for sponsoring this video. Mubi is a curated cinema streaming service for everything from art house to cinema classics. What's cool is that Mubi hosts just 30 hand-picked films. Every day they present a new film, and every day they take one away. It's so fun to check the site and see what new movie has been selected that day. They even put together special collections that celebrate specific auteurs and categories. They've just had programs on Buñuel, Godard, and they've recently added a Harmony Korine double feature. Finally, a streaming service that is above all, streamlined. Try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/CinemaTyler. That's mubi.com/CinemaTyler for your extended free trial. But wait, there's more. If you head on over to my Patreon and pledge any amount, you'll receive an exclusive 90-day VIP pass to Mubi while supplies last. Join me and the rest of my patrons in April for a special Patreon-exclusive movie club, where we will discuss the films we watch on Mubi. Hope to see you there.